Not that.
Okay, I'll kind of kick it off real quick before I turn it over to Professor Brody. But for those of you who don't know, my name is Mark Bex. I work at the national office here at the NCAA. Thanks for joining us. Mark Brody has put together to answer some questions for you. One of the main things that was that Marcusella got from us in the support chat that Mark's going to lead off with is a lot about individual points and individual movement, individual as opposed to team. So there was a lot of questions about Thomas Sharkey versus Wyndham Memorial. So again, the one thing I'll reiterate is when he's showing specific examples, just remember that they are related to each other. So just because this is a specific example, if something similar happens in a different event, it's the same exact outcome. So anyway, enough of that. So I just wanted to thank again Professor Brody for doing this and Marcus for kind of coordinated, and I'll turn it over to them. Thanks, guys.
I'll chime in real quick too with just a couple housekeeping things. If you can, go ahead and put your microphone on mute just so we don't have any background noise. Again, Professor Brody's going to lead off with kind of what was a common question this week that I've kind of sent to him. So he's got some slides prepared for that. But as we keep going, feel free to post questions in the meeting chat, and then I'll try to post those to Professor Brody when I can. If we do your specific question, we'll probably ask you to turn on your video, turn on your mic, and we'll let you ask the question so you can have some dialogue with Professor Brody as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark Beddix. Thanks, Marcus L. We got Mark, and Marcus here as usual. Also, if you have a question about what I'm covering on a given slide or what I just said, just unmute and ask your question. If what I said is confusing or maybe I misspoke or something, please kind of let me know right away. One of the things we had a brief discussion about in the last week was what do we call this ranking, and I think we sort of converged on National Collegiate Golf Ranking. So going to try and use that going forward. As usual, you can send questions, and some of the questions that I'll be going over this week were sent into this email, support@clip.io. So you can always send questions there. They get forwarded to me if Marcus doesn't answer them directly. But it would be helpful, mainly for me, if you could identify the league, the division, the gender, and whether it's a team or individual question. So sometimes I get questions about whatever, and it's shortened, like what happened in the Guadalajara. So I look up Guadalajara, and there's no event Guadalajara, but it was a course. And I can find it eventually, but it's just easier if I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. Last week, I don't know if we spent 45 minutes on a question from Lauren about the NAIA Crossroads League, where he said the points in this one particular event, the Harbor Shores Intercollegiate, were too large for the winner. And I'd say there's kind of, we spent a long time on this and kind of now feel bad for partly wasting people's times. But I'd like to say that he was right and I was right. He has a belief that the conference rater said the teams in this league should be rated first Marion, then IWU, Taylor, Bethel, Huntington, and Grace. So I don't know who his conference raters are, but he was pretty firm in that opinion. And I'm firm in the opinion that this is the most accurate college golf ranking system we've ever had. But yet there's a contradiction there because the rankings didn't match what the conference raters had. So I went after the call and I looked more deeply into it, and I found that there was a large error in the scores of the Harbor Shores Intercollegiate. And that large error in the scores led to large point differences and ranking differences. So after refreshing the rankings, these are what the new rankings look like this week, which oh man, I gotta turn on my pen here. There we go. The new rankings match exactly what the conference raters thought they should be. with the exception of a small switch at 35 and 38 between Grace and Huntington. So the conference raters were right. I think I'm still right that these are accurate rankings, but the key is data integrity. I only run the algorithm on the data that I get, and the data I get needs to be as clean and accurate as possible. So I would, just a plea, please continue to check all your results for not only your team and your events, but the other teams around you, to ensure the integrity of the data. And in this particular case, it made a big difference. So moving on, this appeared on social media about match play ranking volatility, and two comments. Match play has less variance than stroke play, one of the coaches wrote, and I think it was Brentley Romine of the Golf Channel. This would indicate that Mark Brody said about match play doesn't really have a huge impact. And I don't want my words to be misunderstood. I said variations of that for sure, but I want to clarify so everybody knows what exactly is happening with the rankings, which is the match play rank volatility, which is a one-round event, has on average the same ranking volatility as a one-round stroke play event. It's designed so that those are the same. If you play one round of stroke play, you play one round of match play, the ranking volatility on average is going to be the same. Now, it can be low or it can be high. So any one match result, the ranking volatility can be high if there's an upset. And the ranking volatility will typically be low if the expected outcome occurs. So on average, they match up, but on any one outcome, it may not. So if A is ranked higher than B, A is expected to win. And if A wins, not much is going to happen to the ranking. If B wins, it's an upset, and there will be a big move in the ranking. B will move up a fair amount, and A will move down a fair amount because it's an upset, and it says, we got some new information that the rankings weren't exactly right, and they need to adjust. If A and B are ranked similarly, then if there's a tie, there won't be much ranking volatility because that's kind of what you expect. If either A or B wins, there will be more movement because the rankings will be updated. Not as much as the case of an upset, but there will also be some movement there. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not the case that match play has low volatility. It is true one round doesn't have as much effect as 3 rounds. That's always true. But that's the same in match play and stroke play. Okay. Any questions on that? Did that make sense? I hope I'm not wasting your time there. All right, so ton of questions on the Thomas Sharkey individual collegiate. And I spent hours trying to think of what's the easiest way that I can kind of explain this. And I threw out a whole bunch of stuff that I did and ended up with this. But these are where the questions are coming from. The winner of this event was Nathan Franks. And he moved up 373 ranking positions and earned 65 points, which is much more than he earned in any other event that he played in. And it was a relatively weak event. So there's Nathan Franks winning over there in this Thomas Sharkey in red. And there's the 65 points, and he's got this big ranking move. And so it's completely understandable. You take a look at the website, and all you see are 65 points in this big ranking move, and you say, oh man, what's going on there? Well, there's a lot of comments. First, it was his best event by far. That's why he earned the most points. Do I think he received too many points? And I think the answer is no. I got to justify that for you. Was his ranking increase justified? I think the answer is yes. I got to justify that. Is there an advantage to playing in weaker events? No. People look at this and say, oh, let's just play in a weaker event and we'll all of a sudden miraculously move way up in the rankings. That's just not true. I gave many, many examples of that in the last couple of things. So I hope you don't take a look at this one outcome and come away with that. Okay. So part of the question wasn't just what happened at the Thomas Sharkey. It was relative to the Wyndham Memorial And if you take a look at the Wyndon Memorial, the winner of the Wyndon Memorial over here got almost the same points, so just slightly fewer points than the winner of the Thomas Sharkey. And the Wyndon Memorial is a stronger event by a considerable amount. So this difference here of 2.5 strokes per player per round is a big strength of field difference. So let's see. Oh, and Marcus pointed out that I do have some typos already. So some of these numbers aren't quite right. The points I think are right. The event strokes gained look like they're off a little bit, so sorry about that. So these numbers, just kind of ignore those a little bit. It was a 1-stroke difference, and they got the same points because they had about the same event strokes gained. Okay. So one comment is, this is not a typical case. It's typical that the winner of a stronger event gets more points than the winner of a weaker event, but it's not always true. Okay. There's nothing about the player IDs. Any player who won the Thomas Sharkey with the same score would have gotten those points. So it doesn't know that Nathan Franks won that event or what his rank was coming in. His move was large because it was his best event and he started with a low rank. So in general, you can expect a lot more movement for individuals in their ranking than you will of teams. Teams are an average of 4 or 5 scores, and the team movement is much smaller because it's really like the average of 4 or 5 players involved. Whereas a single player, there's a lot more volatility in scores and a lot more volatility in results and then in the rankings. Okay, so the reason that they got about the same points is when you adjust the scores for the course difficulty, they had about the same event strokes gained. I wanted to show you 2 other events where we still have the win, and this is the same as before, but I want to compare it to the Hamptons Intercollegiate. The Hamptons Intercollegiate was also a weaker event, not quite as weak. It was a little bit more than a stroke or so weaker. But the winner of the Hamptons Intercollegiate got a boatload more points than the winner of the Wyndon. In fact, the winner of the Hamptons Intercollegiate got 129 points, and the winner of the Wyndon got 63 points. And again, I might have some of these numbers there off a little bit. So if you looked at those 2 events, you'd have the same question, which is, why did the winner of the weaker event, Hamptons only had 66 players, and they weren't as good, get way more points than the winner of the Wyndon? Okay, again, this is not typical, but it does happen fairly regularly. It happens more with individuals than it does with teams. Does anybody know why? Why this happened? So I tried to disguise this a little bit, but you know who those 2 players were? I think Lauren is about to say something, maybe.
I'm just guessing that it was because of the strokes gained significance.
Absolutely.
How much they beat the field by.
Yeah, they beat the field by a ton. And who were they? Well, they were Luke Powell, who was ranked 8th, and he won beating Nick Dunlap. Nick Dunlap, of course, won the Amex Professional PGA Tournament, which was big news a couple of weeks ago. So there's Nick Dunlap. He got 110 points for coming in seconds. Nick Dunlap, I think, is pretty fairly ranked at number 1. Nick Dunlap had to get that many points in order to be ranked number 1. That's consistent with his number 1 ranking. the Luke Powell points are consistent with his number 8 ranking. It was a little bit better than his normal, but still he had to get points up in the 100 range in order to be fairly compensated for their enormous strokes gain differential relative to the field average. So the field average strokes gained was -3 point something, and they're way up there close to 5. So they're beating the field by 8 strokes or something like that. It's well, they're beating the field by 7.6 strokes. So if you looked just at the points and you didn't know who this was, and you said, man, 129 points for that event and only 60 points for the Winden, and your first reaction might be, let's cut those points. They're not fair. Well, if you cut those points, it would be unfair to Luke Powell and Nick Dunlap. You would give them a negative incentive for playing in weaker events. If you said, if you beat the field by a huge amount, we're not going to give you that many points because it's just too many for some reason. So I'm trying to argue here that even though the Winden was a stronger event, Luke Powell and Nick Dunlap getting almost double the points was a fair reward for their performance. They just happened to be 2 really good players playing well in a weak event.
But Mark,
And
can
strokes gain figures that out. Yeah,
can I
Warren,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question there? Yeah, but that thinking, by and large, and we can apply that same thinking to the team stuff. By and large, that thinking where a high-ranked team has to get maximum points because they're a high-ranked team or an individual, it by and large ensures that those high-ranked individual teams will remain in the top. Like the system.
No. So I wanna say that part, the last part is not true. If these 2 players, it doesn't know who they were, they're not guaranteed 100 points. And I can show you other events where if they finish down here, they're going to get 20, 30, 40 points. Being a high ranked team in an event doesn't guarantee you getting a large number of points. Here, I'm just saying it's consistent with their other events that they played in the fall.
Oh, so what you're saying there, Mark, is they didn't get the 110 because Nick needs that many to stay at number 1. They got the 110 because of the strokes gained.
Correct.
And my struggle is still that when you then go back and average those points, the strokes gained is too strong of a component in the algorithm because 129 compared to 63, like go back to whoever this player was that got 63 points, that guy now has no shot of catching the top players. Like that's just such a significant
that's not true.
Okay.
The person that won the Winden didn't get 100 points because they didn't beat the field by an equivalent amount.
Right. I get your thinking there. What I'm saying is the reward is just too great once you go back and average points together.
The reward that Luke Powell and Nick Dunlap got is consistent with suppose they played in about 4 events in the fall. It's consistent with their 6 other events. This is not out of line for them.
Okay.
They're not getting this because that's how many points they came in with. I'm saying that's consistent with all the other outcomes that they had in stronger events.
Okay, so what you're saying, Mark, I appreciate that. What you're saying is Nick typically gets 110 because that's where he places in a strong event. He gets 110 for beating the field by a little bit.
Correct.
And in this event, he gets 110 for beating the field by a lot, in spite of the fact it's a weaker field.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
If I can kind of interject a little bit, I've got a question maybe for my own curiosity. Again, specifically talking about Thomas Sharkey, maybe even I guess maybe more so with the Thomas Sharkey event. I think some of the confusion, at least, and again, maybe I'm just talking selfishly here. is maybe not so focused on how many points they received, but maybe more so where that placed them after the fact. So like if we just look specifically with Franks from South Carolina, right? Ranked 520th in the country before this event, places first at the Sharkey, moves up to 93. I think, and again, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, it may be hard for people to contextualize that one event result now warrants a top 100 in the country ranking. So again, maybe if you just want to help explain that, because when you look at the rest of his results, it wouldn't, in my mind at least, tell me that that's a top 100 player in the country. But now all of a sudden we add this one result and they are.
Sure, sure. So I'm not exactly sure if I have this Nathan Frank slide. I think I have it coming up, and I'll get to that one. Let me just take a quick look here. Oh, and I don't. So let me try and come back to that. If I bring up his kind of ranking page that we have. So I'll try and come back to this. But this is putting these three events next to each other. The Nathan Frank's winner over there, Nick Dunlap coming in second over there, and I forget who won the Winden over there.
I believe it was
like
Purdue's Herman Wiebe-Sikane, I think is how you say it, maybe something around there.
Yeah. So it's again, it's typically the case that, oh, come on here. Stronger events, the winners get more points, but definitely it didn't happen here. And part of that is the top players at the Winden just didn't separate themselves as much from the field as is typical. There was one player, actually there's two, but one player, Wilhelm Riding, who played in both the Thomas Sharkey and the Winden. He's ranked 745, and he had almost the same performance in both those events, but in the weak event, he finished 20th. In the Winden, the stronger event, he finished 35th. And very similar strokes gained performances, very similar points. 5 and 7 I consider similar. And you can see him there. That's kind of what happens. The method adjusts for the strength of field. And if you play in a stronger field, a 35th finish can give you the same points as a 20th finish in a weaker field. That's exactly what happened to him. So that was kind of typical. So maybe, Marcus, I'll try and come back to yours. There's another question about, I don't know if Jeff Hull is on here, about field strength and how field strength is measured and how it compares to Wagger.
Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it. He said he had another appointment that came up late, but I think would still be good to go through it if you got a little bit of time.
Okay, and if there's something in the chat, let me know about that. So points are awarded based on the strokes gained in the event, and that has two components. How much did the player beat the field by? And then how strong was the field? And so the question is, well, where does that come from? How do you measure the strength of the field? And it's measured on the average strength of teams in the field. And that particular measure is appropriate for this ranking system. It's an average strength, which means if you have a small event with two strong teams, this will count as a strong event. Wagger and OWGR use a measure which is more like the total strength. And there, if you have 50 teams versus 2 teams, the 50 team is the stronger event in their terminology, because they're trying to measure how difficult is the event to win. And the reason they're doing that is they're awarding fixed points for each finish position. And so when you have a certain number of points for a win, you want to give more points the harder that event is to win. So different ranking systems have different measures of strength of field. And I think the confusion is that in our ranking system, this is an average-based measure, which doesn't take into account the number of teams. It just averages the strength of each team. Whereas Wagger and OWGR giving fixed points per position. It's a total measure. And so that's the main, difference between the two. You also had a question about the Puerto Rico and this. Maybe go into one other thing. He had another question about, since he's not here, I'll skip the Puerto Rico and the Guadalajara, but he did have another question about adjusted scoring average. And this is related to strokes gained. So after this, I'll open it up to other questions. So both GolfStat, Golf Week, and this ranking system are really based on head-to-head stroke differentials. They're very similar in that respect, that head-to-head stroke differentials are driving the systems. And head-to-head strokes differentials are going into adjusted scoring average. So our adjusted scoring average is really strokes gained. It uses all head-to-head stroke differentials simultaneously, and you can think of it as adjusting for the course scoring conditions, or strokes gained as performance at a neutral or sort of common course. GolfStat's adjusted scoring average is very similar. It doesn't take into account all head-to-head stroke differentials. It takes into account stroke differentials one event at a time. So the difference is, if one new event is added in the GolfStat adjusted scoring average method, you're going to learn certain teams are a little bit stronger, a little bit weaker based on that new event that was added to the data. What GolfStat doesn't do is it doesn't go back to events from the fall and say, oh, now that we know that this team is a little bit stronger and that team is a little bit weaker, let's adjust everybody else's adjusted scoring average. So it does take into account all the head-to-heads happening, but not these indirect things that happened in the past. The GolfStat method's events are processed sequentially, one at a time, you can think. So the order of the events matter. And if you actually took the results and you inverted them in time, you would get different adjusted scoring averages in the GolfStat method. Whereas the method that we use...
Mark, I know this isn't the point of the conversation, but I do want to correct you there that I don't think either of those things are true.
Well, I think they are, and I can't find the equations, but I have down what he wrote. And what he does say is when you get new events, the new adjusted scoring averages are then rerun sequentially from the beginning. And then you get new results, and things are run sequentially from the beginning. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I've checked out some of the numbers and be happy to go into more detail, but those are consistent with what I've checked out from his numbers. So I would say that these two methods are similar, though the GolfStats method is slightly less accurate. And happy to talk with Marcus if I've gotten a little bit wrong. This is what another Mark says in his write-up, if you want to see the description of what he does. But we agree on a couple of things. Number one, adjusted scoring average. This is GolfStat talking here, Mark Lesh. Adjusted scoring average is a more relevant base of comparison than raw scoring numbers. And absolutely, you cannot use raw scoring numbers. And he says on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being awful and 10 being perfect, raw scoring numbers would get a 1. They're about as bad as you can do. And the reason is, long courses and short courses are different. Windy conditions, calm conditions are very different. You just cannot use raw scoring average. So both of these are methods to adjust for the course scoring conditions. The other thing he says is, it's not to say someday we won't have something better, and he would be open to that. And all I'm trying to argue here is that our adjusted scoring average is a little bit more accurate, but it's very similar in terms of trying to take into account the course conditions. Okay. I don't know, maybe we can go to the chat, and then if you want, we can go back to some women player ranking questions. Any ideas, Mark? What, Marcus, I meant?
Yeah, at the moment, we don't have anything in the chat. So whether you want to pull up the Frank's profile or if you want to go into some of the women's individual rankings, I feel either one would be hang tight. Shane has a question. So when computing the strokes gained for events, you guys check weather conditions for each event?
No, we don't. We don't have that information in the data, and we see the conditions based on the scores. If the scores go up because it's windy, we see higher scores. So we only see scores. We don't see some other measure of weather conditions. And part of the reason is it would just be a massive data problem, and wind is only part of it. The length of every hole, the pin locations, you can put pins in the middle, you can put pins tucked near the edge of the green. That's going to make a huge difference independent of wind. So what we do see are scores, and that's basically what's used to infer the course conditions. And when you look at head-to-head results of two players or teams playing on the same course in the same condition, and you look at the difference in scores, that's now getting rid of the course conditions because they're playing the same course in the same conditions. And so you're looking at the difference in scores. And so it's that head-to-head nature of stroke differentials that really subtracts out or corrects for the difference in conditions. Did that help at all? Shane, did I answer your question? Might be on mute there.
It sounds like we're good there.
Okay.
If Corey, if you're on, if you can't come off of mute, maybe pop up the video too if you want to answer your question directly.
Yeah, can everybody see me and hear me good? Perfect.
Yep.
So how are the multipliers calculated from, let's say, going from like so we played in that Thomas Sharkey event, and so we're a Division II school. So like one of my guys, I'm looking at it right here on the Sharkey leaderboard, got 1 point, but then it's converted to I believe it was 9 Division II points. Like
Yep.
how does that work, or what's that process like?
That process is arbitrary, and it's a conversion from D1 points to D2 points in your case, so that the leaders of the D2 division have, 50 or 100 points, and the leaders of the D1 division have 50 or 100 points, and the leaders of the D3 division have 50 or 100 points. So it's just a conversion to a different point scale that is fairly arbitrary, but just so that by the time you get to NJCAA, the whatever 100th ranked player, they don't have 0.0001 points, so that all the points are on sort of comparable scales. So to make points across widely
What does she
different
need?
playing skills,
Oh, you can take this.
comparable, you have these conversions. But they're kind of arbitrary. It's like, what's the exchange rate between the dollar and the yen? Well, it's a factor of 100, but it doesn't actually matter. $2 in whatever currency is going to buy something in Japan. I know interest rates or exchange rates fluctuate, and here they're kind of fixed, but it is kind of an arbitrary conversion factor. There's no other reason to it other than to make different divisions have the top players with comparable looking points. Did that answer it, Corey?
I think so. I'm not sure if I'm following. Like, so is the multiplier then determined for each field strength?
No. It's so if everybody played in just D2 events, there wouldn't be any conversion of anything. It's only when somebody is playing in a D1 event that the D2 points are inflated in order that the top ranked D1 player, as it looks like they have similar points to the top ranked D2 player, D1 and D2. So there is one conversion factor which is the same. It doesn't depend on how strong or how weak the event is or anything like that. And It's literally, it doesn't affect the rankings. So maybe say this another way is we start the rankings on a universal point system where everything is the same. And then when they're published, there's this conversion factor added. So
Okay.
underneath the hood, all players are earning universal points that are the same for every player, every event, every division. So it's only a display issue.
Okay, so so then would it benefit me as a Division II school to, would it take out variability of my play in terms of the team if we could get into a Division I event that they've then played better teams? So like it looks in terms of the strokes gained, it's a better competition than like a, let's say, a weaker Division II event.
No, what I've looked at extensively is if you do everything in D2 points,
Okay.
the average D2 points a team gets in D2 events is the same as the average points they get when they happen to play in D1 events. And it's the same as when they happen to play in D3 events. When you measure everything in D2 points, there's no advantage or disadvantage playing up or down. Now, if you play in a stronger event, typically D1 events are stronger, but not all of them. But if you play in a stronger event, you don't need as high a finish to get the same points. And we saw that here with Wilhelm riding. A 20th finish in the Sharkey was equivalent to a 35th finish in the Winden, and they were very different field strengths. So the reasons I think to play out of the division are you like the course, or you want to play in a stronger event so that the players get more experience playing in a tougher field. But there's no ranking advantage to doing so. There may be psychological reasons for doing it. There might be travel reasons for doing it. There might be course reasons. You want to play that course, but there's not going to be a ranking benefit to doing it. It's not going to hurt you either. So it's neither going to help nor hurt. I would consider playing out of your division if it made sense for other reasons than ranking reasons.
Okay. So, and just so I'm following, and this will be, I know I'm taking up a lot of time here.
Yeah.
But it would give more of a performance buffer in terms of if it's a Division I, which are not always, but for the sometimes stronger fields, to say, okay, and rather than going to a weaker Division II event where I need to finish third to maintain my points, I could go to this Division I event and, depending on the field, get the same amount of points if I finish 7th or 8th, potentially. Is that correct?
That's correct, but you would get the same points because your team played as well. And playing as well means third, and one weaker event is equivalent to 7th or 8th in a stronger event. So, I mean, there could be one single team here that not only finished last, but finished last by a fair amount in the Winden, finish near the bottom of the pack here, finish maybe a third of the way down there. Big difference between those scores and those scores. This team would get the same points playing in any three of those events, but one event is finishing last by a lot. The other event, they come in, near the bottom, and in the other event, they come in the bottom third. Those three finishes give them the same points, because when you adjust for the scoring conditions, they score the same. That's basically what the points come off of this event strokes gain, which is basically their scores adjusted for the how difficult it is. But you go into, if that happened to be a strong event, you go in there and you lose by a boatload, you're not going to get many points.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. this was, I think, a question that's come up in a couple of different contexts before about player rankings. And
Hey, Mark, can I jump in here real
sure,
quick?
please. Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to make sure everybody keeps using the term multiplier. And again, we keep using conversion. You don't get, your points aren't multiplied if you're Division II school playing in a Division I event. And I hope everybody understands that, because that keeps coming up. The word multiplier is not a thing. It's a conversion. So you're converting from Division I to Division II. So it's, your points are based on your performance at the event. So he's shown a million times where you could be playing in a Division I event as a Division II school and get way worse points than you got from playing in Division II events. So I'll stop. Go ahead and Mark, go back to where you were. Sorry. I just
No,
wanted to
thanks, Mark
reiterate
Beddix. And I think it's much better terminology to call it a conversion, because it is like a different currency. It's like different units. You're not actually multiplying the points. You're not getting D2 points that get multiplied by a factor. They're just converted from D1 points to D2 points. So everybody in D2 is measured relative to this D2 points scale. So it's a conversion, not a factor, as Mark Beddix said. Thank you. So in the women's player rankings, the question from Jeff Hull was, how can Ingrid Lindblad shoot -8, finish second, and drop from 4th to 5th? So it was a good score. It was a good finish, but moved down in the rankings. So let me just focus on that. The others are kind of similar. Number one, shooting -8 is clearly a good score, but it all depends on how the scoring conditions were that day or that event. So don't look at raw scoring averages. Please look at adjusted scores. Strokes gained are the same. But let me take a look at this. These were the rankings last week and this week. And the question is, what's happening to Ingrid Lindblad? So number one is, yes, Ingrid was ranked 4th, but she was in a virtual tie with Maisie Filler in 5th. So there's a tie for 4th and 5th by the tiniest of margins. So any little thing anywhere could have moved her from 4th to 5th. So one of the reasons we're showing the average points is you can see the gaps, not just the ranks, but you can see the gaps here between 1st and 2nd is huge compared to the gap between 4 and 5, which is non-existent, basically. So what happened? Maria Jose Marin, who was ranked number 1, played below average. She finished 16th or something in an event. Didn't get very many points. Her average points declined significantly from around 100 to 80. I mean, that's a huge drop in points. So she still is ranked number 1, but she got much, much, much closer to rank 2 after that decline. So she stayed ranked 1, even by finishing 16th. But if you take a look at what happened in the ranking, she is much closer to number 2 by far. And I just want to remind, I found this slide from the Las Vegas convention where I put this up because the question was, has Maria Jose Marin locked number 1 for the season at the end of the fall? And my answer was, she is not locked number 1. In fact, if she plays like a ranked 30 player for the rest of the season, she could end up 13th for the season. Even if she plays like a number 10 ranked player, she could end up ranking 5th. There's no way that she was a lock at number 1. And this is sort of just a one more event example of this, how one event when you, she, I think, only had 2 or 3 events. So this event sort of reduced her points by a lot. So the weekly ranking changes depends on not just what happens to one player in the case of Ingrid, but it depends on the results of all nearby players and the gaps between nearby players. Julia Ramirez, ranked 2, had a match play loss and a match play win. Her average points declined, and she's now ranked 4th. So why is that typically? Well, if you rank number 2 and you win, you're not going to go up very much. But if you have a loss, it's probably a bigger upset. So those two don't necessarily cancel out. A loss is going to hurt her more than a win helps, and she went down to rank 4. Megan Gann didn't play, and she was ranked the same. She was in a Ingrid Lindblad was in a virtual tie with Maisie Filler. Maisie Filler won 2 matches, and she moved up. So the reason Ingrid Lindblad moved down was more because Maisie Filler moved up than what Ingrid did. They were in a virtual tie. Maisie Filler won 2 matches, and she moved up, and that's why Ingrid dropped from 4th to 5th. But I've received different variations of that question for teams and for men players and whatever. And it's just very hard to take a look at one player in one event and say, you know, why did this happen? Because you got to take a look at everything that's around that. Anyway, but Ingrid is clearly a premier player. Whether she's 4th or whether she ends up 1st or whatever, she's definitely an amazing player.
We got Brian Lane with us. If Ryan, if you want to come off of mute, we'll let you ask your question about your fall event. There we
Good
go.
afternoon, Brian Lane from Transylvania University, NCAA Division III. One of the things that I was we
Sorry,
ran
is that Division III men and women?
Could be men.
NCAA Division III men.
Okay.
We host a tournament the very first weekend of the year, Labor Day weekend, and so I was trying to figure out one, if we need to move that tournament back. I apologize. I also coach basketball, and I have practice here in about 2.5 hours. So for me to be on here with you for an hour kind of gives you the importance of the discussion.
Sorry, which school are you at?
Transylvania University.
What's your rank about?
The rank?
Yeah. Sorry, you said men's D2?
Men's Division III.
Oh, sorry. Brought up the wrong one. Sorry.
It's okay. We've won 15 of the last 16 conference championships.
They're currently 53rd.
It's
okay.
So my question is, we had the top 5 individuals in our tournament. We had a -10, -9, -8, -7, -6. The Transylvania Fall Invite early in the year. All those players had beaten another young man in our conference, and then Rose Holman, Austin Frick, and then they played 3 weeks later in an event where Austin beat the field rather handedly, and received 86 points. And the top 5 finishers in our tournament combined did not get 86 points. I mean, the Jan Antonin, the kid from Webster, I mean, he's a pro. I mean, he's like, he finished 25th in the Czech professional event. And he got 23 points. And in Austin, so he beat him handily in our tournament, but then it flipped and went to I guess it's a Region 8 tournament.
Sorry, what is his name? I'm trying to bring up one here. I didn't know. I was first looked at the team, but now a player. Which player are you talking about?
Jan, Jan, Antonin, Antonin.
Gotcha.
And I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but WDO.
Gotcha. Okay. So he's at Webster. Let me bring this up so we can look at this maybe while you're talking here.
Because I guess my question is, if you have a tournament at the beginning of the year and the points are handed out after that, after that tournament, and then people start playing well down the stretch, like, towards the end, do you not play, do you not host those tournaments at the beginning, or are you better off playing later? Or?
So you should, okay, so that one's pretty quick to answer, which is it should not matter. And this is, again, part of the requirements that I was given. Spring is not given more weight than fall. Fall is not given more weight than the spring. Every event that goes into the season is counted the same, no matter when it's played. So what will happen, though, is as we get more spring events, the entire ranking is rerun. And if teams or players look stronger because of their spring results compared to the fall, or if they looked weaker, those points in the fall will be adjusted slightly up or down. So it doesn't matter whether it was played in the fall and what things look like in the fall. What's going to matter at the end is when all the events are put into the hopper, what comes out. So they're not going to be big adjustments, but there will be small adjustments as more information comes in. And it could be the case that the Transylvania Fall Invitational, we find out, was actually stronger than we thought it was in the fall, and those players will get somewhat more points. Or if we find out it was a slightly weaker field, they'll get a little bit less. So it's not going to make a huge difference, but it will be, I think, a little bit more accurate doing things that way. So it doesn't matter whether you play in the fall or the spring. What matters are the outcomes.
Okay. The teams that finished in there are McDaniel, Webster, Trancey. So those combined, the top three, and it was a 3-day event. One shot -2, one shot -1, and the other shot even. And the total points was 31.
Okay.
And then Rose Holman went to the Region 8 tournament and got 29 points for shooting +17 and beating the second place team, who was +34 in 2 rounds. It was like, it makes them, and they had finished behind all those teams in the Trancey tournament and all those teams in the Rhodes tournament. Like,
okay, so the question is, Webster. I'm trying to hit one here to try and answer some of this. So if you take a look at Webster here, their current division rank is 58. Their adjusted scoring average rank is 61. And I kind of point this out because adjusted scoring average doesn't have any points involved. It also doesn't have any match play involved. And we expect these two to be reasonably similar. So the question is a rank of 58 reasonable for Webster?
No, I'm not worried about it. The only issue that I have with the rankings is, like, our conference had to come up with some kind of ranking system in the event that our tournament is canceled in the spring. Who would we send to the national tournament?
Gotcha. Okay.
And so we're in a discussion, like, there's no way we can use this because, we're up, 1-1 with our next competitor, but and up 18 shots, but like 30 behind in the rankings. Like, okay, that you can only do something as serious as doing, sending a team to the national tournament, in the event of, such bad weather.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So let me look at Webster, and then I'll put up Transylvania here. So Webster in the Transylvania, they won, and it happened to be their best event with this -5 strokes gained. And you can see their best event got them 11 points instead of 4 and 5 for the other events. Against weaker, meaning lower ranked teams, they had an 853 win percentage. And against stronger teams, they were 7-10-1, so 4-12. So they beat up on the weaker teams and they lost to the stronger teams with a few exceptions. And how many exceptions were there? Well, they lost to 5 weaker teams and they beat 7 stronger teams, which is almost a complete balance of upsets. So most of their results with Webster ranked at 58 is expected. They have 29 wins against teams you expect them to beat. They have 10 losses against teams you expect them to lose to. And the upsets can be in one of two flavors. They can lose to weaker teams or they can beat stronger teams. And the upsets are 7 and 5, almost completely balanced. So I would say this is one of my arguments that Webster is fairly ranked at 58. If I take a look at Transylvania, you're at 53. Is that, you think that is not, you should be higher, lower, or what?
No, I think that's what it is. The question would be probably Rose Pullman.
Oh, okay. So which is, okay. Rose. Okay, they're ranked 36. Okay, there you go. So there is, first thing I look at, okay, there's a fairly big difference between their adjusted scoring average and their division rank. And the reason for that big difference is they had a great tournament at this NCAA Division III Region 5 showcase. So that's,
They shot 17 over in 2 rounds. And the
yeah, but
next team
yeah.
was plus 34. Like
Yeah.
the field wasn't even, there was no comparison.
Yeah. So they're ranked where they were because they did incredibly well, even though it was a weak event.
Right.
And
that's my concern. So that's why in the discussion, like, okay, we can't use this to rank the conferences unless all the teams are playing the same events, because kicking, like, they got more points for that event than the top 3 really good teams in the Transylvania event combined.
Yep.
Just because they beat the second place team 17 shots. It was plus 17 plus 34 in 2 days or 2 rounds, and they got more.
Yep. So this is basically saying that their field that they played in was weak by about 4 strokes compared to their other events. So the difference in these strength of fields, minus 7.5, minus 8 versus minus 11. Okay, so that's about 3.5, 4 stroke difference. But they played 7.5 strokes better than the field. They didn't play 3.5 strokes better. They played 7.5. And that was basically the difference, is they played 3 strokes better than they usually do per round per player, which is if they played their normal to their normal level, which is down here, they played their normal level, they would have come in, second or third in this week event. They not only won, but then they won by a lot. And so that's basically,
they won by 17 shots because the second team shot plus 34. So, but that's where my confusion is. Just because they beat somebody by 17 shots, that's not very good. Jumping them all the way, like they were 9th in our tournament,
yep.
8th in the Rhodes tournament, 6th in the Mason-Dixon.
Yep.
The young man that won that region tournament is now a top 20 player, and he wasn't in the top 20
Yep.
in the other those 2 of those other 3 tournaments. Austin Frick. Yeah.
So that's, I'm not sure what I can say other than this is very similar to the Nick Dunlap, Luke Powell kind of situation where it doesn't know the name of the player, the name of the team, where they're coming from. It just sees strokes. And it's not so much that they won by 17 shots over second place. How much they won compared to this field was just way more than you would have expected. It was clearly their best event.
Who would have expected? I mean,
based on these other 3 events, compared to these other 3 events, they played much better.
well, I mean, the fields were like, there's no comparison on the, you know, as you look. So I think I've kind of got it. If you're saying that if I have my tournament the very first weekend of the year, and that is still going to be tied to everything the rest of the year, to where if somebody, you know, if we're handing out points the first week and nobody knows how good anybody is except for those, as long as they all get tied back to that first week, then I can keep it there and continue to get teams to come, would be my
Yeah,
guess.
the reason we don't do a ranking after week 1 is we have no idea how good or poor the teams are. So the original plan was halfway through the fall,
Okay.
but
I understand.
every new ranking will go back to the fall events and readjust.
Okay. So do you think if you were having to do a conference ranking to decide the NCAA, the team that goes to the NCAA tournament, do you think just going flat by the rankings would work, or is there a head-to-head component that should be used?
I think it would work, but I don't think it's the only thing that should be used. And I know Mark Beddix can speak more to exactly how that's done. The rankings are an input, and the rankings take into account all the head-to-heads, but there's other things that the committees look at.
Okay.
Mark
I'm
Beddix?
on the All-American committee too, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, how to compare all these individuals as well to get those correct selections at the end. So thank you very much.
Anyway, thank you, Brian. I hope that helped a little bit.
It did.
Hey, Brian, the one thing, this is Mark Bexton, the one thing I'll chime in, and this is whether it's golf or I've been here for 26 years, and now that the transparency is as great as it is, and we list the exact points, this is like in other sports using RPI or so forth, or Division III uses rating system. The big thing is there's no rating system that's really designed to put people in exact order. It's in Mark refers to how sometimes they're technically basically tied. So all ranking systems are basically set up to group people and not necessarily separate people, if that makes sense. So when you're looking through, and I'm just going to use Division I because that's what I have on my screen. But if you're like from a team ranking standpoint, Wake Forest is 108 and Texas is 81. That's 17 significant numbers. So that means that Wake Forest is, all the rankings tell you is Wake Forest is clearly better than Texas. But from a comparison standpoint, you use like the one comparison is USC has 86.35, UCLA has 85.96, and South Carolina has 85.63. So what that's really telling you is those three teams are really close. It's basically a tie for fourth.
Right.
Just to be clear that's technically how rating systems technically work. And again, whether it's the RPI or something. So anyway.
Yeah. Biggest thing was just like, because I was actively involved in the discrepancy in the top 5 players at our event, all shooting -10 to -3 on the University of Kentucky's home course, good golf course, best scores ever. Those 5 combined did not equal a kid's number 1 finish 2 weeks later that had played in that same tournament and had finished 10th. You know, so it was just.
Yeah, I think Mark answered that. He just means that kid just didn't have a good day that day, and then the other event he played amazing, had his best week of the year.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yep. Thanks, Brian. The other thing, I just want to add one thing that's come up before, which is, I know we're a little bit over time here, which is points are not split. Meaning if you have players, if you have players or teams with a given score that are tied for second, they're not splitting second, third, and fourth place points. There's just more points that are awarded. So I wouldn't look at adding things up. Each team sort of gets points based on their score, And if there happens to be another team tied with them at that score, they get the same points. So if another way to say it is, if you've got 10 teams and you give out certain points, and then 11th team comes in and wins, everybody else gets the same points, and that 11th team just gets additional points that are handed out. So the points are not fixed, and they're not split among finish positions.
It looks like we don't have any other further questions in the chat. And I know we're about 6 minutes over. So again, as always, don't know if I need to turn it back to Bedex or not, but appreciate Mark Brody's time and everybody that asked questions both ahead of the call and on today's call. We will continue to do these on Fridays. I have recorded it, so hopefully we'll be able to put that out in the newsletter on Wednesday for those that did not get to see it. But yeah, thanks everybody for their time.
Thank you, everybody.